Yeah.
It's just when we're running
I
meetings.
recognize, I mean, I went too much.
Yeah,
I hear that.
we're just trying to find that balance.
Oh, yeah, yeah, we'll get it figured out.
Green light's not working.
I'd rather have too much.
I've
than
got
too
one
little.
to tell you
Get it
what.
figured out.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, in fact,
Yeah.
I'll convert to text. There's a lot of stuff.
We good to go yet?
We are live on YouTube.
All right. Okay, I want to welcome everyone and I'll call this meeting to order and we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So I just want to let everyone know that this work session is just informational. And we're going to start out with the Madison Work Group. And the other items are on the agenda, just if there are any questions. We're not going to go through each one of these items unless there are questions. So we'll start out with the Madison River Work Group. Mr. Sperry, if you want to start us out, please.
Good evening, everybody. Chair, Vice Chair Tabor, and the Commission Director Worship, Charlie Sperry, Assistant Division Administrator for the Parks and Outdoor Rec.
Nice job. Jana, can you hear him? Okay,
Okay.
great. Thank you. I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, and if I'm ignoring you, I'm trusting the chair and Madam Chair will let me know. So my job isn't too tough at this point to respect your time. I'm gonna keep this really brief. I mean, the recommendations have been submitted by the work group with Commissioner Walsh coordinating that effort. We have two members of the work group here with us tonight, Mac Menard and Mike Bias. You've seen the recommendation. Staff also put together an assessment on those recommendations and in essence asking, are they implementable from a biological, fiscal, legal, technological aspect? And then in essence, what would it cost to go ahead and implement these? And so we've done that part as well and are prepared tomorrow to provide a highlight on those. And we're here to answer any questions you might have at this point in time. We'll do our best to answer this.
Does anyone have any questions, or Casey, do you want to, do you want to say anything?
I'm happy to.
Sure.
Yeah, I think we had a total of 9 meetings of the work group, and then we broke up the big issues into subcommittees, and those groups really shouldered into the wind and put in the hours. And in the case of the commercial cap, I think no fewer than 20 hours and 8 or 9 meetings, and similar effort went into the non-commercial rec and the entry for new outfitters, which Dan Larson headed up the subcommittee on commercial caps, and Brian McGeehan headed up the subcommittee on recreational non-commercial use, and both of them have been asked to present tomorrow in the commission meeting. So I think the way this is going to unfold is I'd like to make a few comments at the front end, and Charlie's going to present for the department, and then both Brian and Dan will speak to the charges of the recommendations that we've made for the commission to consider. And I just say that it's been a really productive group of people to work with. I've really enjoyed working and getting to know all of the work group members. And in addition to the specific charges of the ARM, I'll mention this again tomorrow, but we have made recommendations for improvements to the fishing access sites, and Hope and her team have been really helpful on that. And I think that we're hoping that work will start in spring of next year. And in addition to that, we've been working with another group to consider the development of a river ambassador program to help facilitate people getting on and off the water. And that's being done in conjunction with the Madison River Foundation. And I have high expectations that they'll launch a pilot program this summer. They're doing that with Montana Conservation Corps, and we'll see how that unfolds. But I think most of in early surveys, most of the conflicts that we read about in the surveys was occurring at the launch sites. So I'm optimistic that we'll have some good dialogue tomorrow, and I'm looking forward to it.
Commissioner Byers, I think you went to a lot of the meetings. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I was just impressed with how the work group gelled and came up with some really strong recommendations and did a lot of deep digging into the background. So I was impressed. I think Commissioner Walsh is to be applauded for his leadership, and I'm just excited to see him move forward.
Well, thanks for attending most of our meetings.
Are there any questions from the commission?
Well, Madam Chair, I think it'd be helpful if we could understand the potential arm roll process moving forward and what options might be available for that. So,
Okay.
That would be Charlie. Can you help us out, Charlie?
Yeah, I can.
Help us understand the new process too.
That I may need some assistance from good counsel over here. But, and I'm remiss, the one document I didn't bring was a tentative administrative rule timeline, but in essence, the agenda item tomorrow is for the commission to make a decision as to what to do next. And if the commission were to initiate administrative rulemaking, then we would need to get on that pretty fast in order to get it started within this calendar year, subject to the statutory language, which means that we need to have rulemaking that's to be adopted and final, all done by September 1, I believe is the date. Potentially another version of that is the commission could start the rulemaking later, with the final then coming after the date. I do have the Secretary of State timeline available. I did not bring it with me, ironically, one thing I didn't bring, but I can get it to you even before the end of the work session.
Or tomorrow would be fine. too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Commissioner Waller, do you have any questions on it? Commissioner Walsh?
I have one, just a public comment period, assuming we did pass these recommendations. Does public comment start on the 23rd? And how long does it run?
I would.
You want me to grab that?
Yeah,
timeline?
why don't you grab it? And I'll offer a quick general response to expand.
Jessica's probably rolling over right now.
If I may, Chair Robinson, Commissioner Walsh, for the record, Quentin Kujala. Yeah, I'll answer this question. I'll answer this way in connecting your question, and I heard, I think it was you earlier that said, and also some insight onto the new commission process as it relates to this discussion. And as it relates to ARM rule development, ARM rule initiating rulemaking, the new commission process defers to that very formally defined process from the Secretary of State's office. So the answer to your question is really embedded in that timeline that Charlie referenced, that he has received from the Secretary of State's office. Here's where the rulemaking is initiated. Here's public comment period. Here's a hearing by, and it's not. And then we would we would look for fitting the right commission meeting subordinate to that defined process. Just conceptually, I hope that answers the question. And then, like I say, Charlie's chasing down that literal time as we talk.
Okay, so I'm going to, like, one of our alternatives is extend the implementation of the cap. So that would also have to be done through an ARM rule if that was chosen.
It's my, Chair Robinson, it's my understanding that given that the cap is captured in ARM, that would be a rulemaking, that would be initiating a rule amendment.
Okay. So the only action that we have listed that wouldn't would be no action. I mean, the other two would take ARM rule
Chair Robinson, at least to the degree of, yes, yes. What I was stammering for there is I don't know if there's a fourth option out there that perhaps someone is thinking about.
Sure, but I mean the ones that we have listed on the
Yes, Chair
cover
Robinson.
sheet. Okay,
That is my understanding, yes.
thank you. Oh, Commissioner Tabor, do you?
Madam Chair, Quentin, so this list of alternatives, does this come from the department or from the working group, or where does this come from? This isn't the only, the commission isn't limited to just these three alternatives.
Vice Chair, Commissioner, Chair Robinson, Vice Chair Tabor, that is correct. It is not meant to limit. It certainly, those are at least three options to pursue. That's why I said the commission may, in its deliberations tomorrow, come up with another option.
Yeah, and just to be clear, the work group would be advocating for alternative B.
I was just a technical question as to if one of these alternatives were chosen as to what it would take to do it. Any other questions? Commissioner Siebel?
Madam Chair, I heard Mr. Sperry mention that let me start out by saying, first of all, thank you guys for all your work on this, and I'll say it again publicly tomorrow in the meeting, because this was a great job and a lot of work done in this. Thinking about where we started with the first arm that we were asked, and then seeing them now, the level of detail that's there's a lot more meat on the bone, for lack of a better term. So I really appreciate the work being done. But I guess I was curious, there's a lot here. Obviously, there's a lot to take in a relatively short period of time. Listening to him, and when we get the timing back, I heard him say that we might be able to delay or still delay the implementation depending on how the ARM process goes. I just see there's a lot of details that need to be addressed here, and I guess that's a question I had about process. He mentioned that it might be able to delay, but I don't know how that would affect the overall implementation date. There it is.
Commissioner Siebel, thank you. Yeah, so you've got two things that are playing into this question around timing. One is the actual administrative rule that was adopted that set up the cap on commercial use based on its highest historical use 2019-20. With that rule language, it states it will go into effect 1st of January 2023. So that's one piece of, that's sitting there right now, the implementation date. And then the other is what Quentin and I were talking about, just in terms of the Secretary of State's timeline for adopting administrative rules, taking into account the limitations on what this body can do in the run up to a legislative session. That's where this timeline gets a little bit quirky, but in essence, there is the ability, you could still do rulemaking this year. Any further delays, and you'd be looking at further on down in terms of final adoption in 2023.
Could you expand, Madam Chair, on the legislature's role and how the legislature in their session impacts the ARM process?
Yeah, I think that in Madam Chair and Commissioner Siebel, I feel like I'm a little bit not the qualified person to provide you with the greatest expertise on these questions. I know Zach Zipper will be around tomorrow. But the gist of it is that for all state agencies in 6 months, I believe, prior to a legislative year, there currently is a restriction, whereas the final date for proposing any type of administrative rule would be the 1st of September, I believe, and then that has to all be done in the calendar year. So and again, I apologize, I'm probably not the person to speak with any expertise to that rule. That's affecting the time.
Madam Chair. I've sent Quentin down to see if we can get legal representation up here. I apologize for not having someone here to do that, to answer these questions. It's not fair to Charlie to put him on the spot for this, so.
Thank you.
Prepared for everything, Director, including the Yellowstone River flood, but that was the one piece of.
Thank you.
Okay.
Did you have a question?
They're all legal and procedural, so if we don't have the right person, they're hard questions to ask. Right, I want to put Mr. Sperry through it.
So I guess we'll put Madison on hold for a minute. Are there any other questions for, on the rest of the agenda? I don't really want to go over everything because we'll do it tomorrow, but if there are specific questions that you would like answered before we start tomorrow.
Is there a question?
No,
Several.
Jess is coming up. If there's any process questions.
Madam Chair. If I could ask Mr. Kujala to step up, I have a series of questions for him.
Yeah.
Madam Chair, Quinn, so just a couple of things about the department's response to the analysis put forth. And so on several different line items, the department had indicated that it likely is going to lead to either an additional FTE or two, might lead to some additional costs associated with IT, some administrative costs and everything else. Has anybody put pencil to paper or fingers to type keyboard or whatever Excel spreadsheet? Do we have a quantification of what the budgetary impact of this proposal is?
Chair Robinson, Vice Chair Tabor, thank you for the question. Yes, we will. We are in a final stage of internal review. You know, that we expect that to be a much looked at product, a lot of detail, some assumptions, and then obviously from those assumptions, just like a fiscal note analysis that we would do for the legislature. So it's on me. We tried to get it here today for this conversation and frankly had another little bit of confirmation in an internal review piece that we wanted to conduct. We will have it available for rumination, review, and discussion tomorrow.
And then this next question might be a co-answer between you and Jesse, because she's here, but Madam Chair,
Go ahead.
sorry. So if I understand the ARM process correctly, if we put it in the administrative rule tomorrow and it gets filed by the next deadline, which I believe is the 28th of June, then there's a very exacted period, a relatively short period for public comment. And the public comment basically has to stay specific to the administrative rules that are being proposed. So they like them or they don't like them. It doesn't give the opportunity for the public to evaluate anything beyond just the rulemaking. Do I have a correct understanding of that?
Chair Robinson, Vice Chair Tabor, I mean, certainly I'll look for anything that Jess might add, but just to be clear, it is possible for edits to come out of the public comment process. So in a final step, there could be editing changes made to the proposed rule language in its final adoption.
This is a follow-up.
Go ahead.
So as I recall, in this, because we've run into these snags before, there's some threshold of materiality relative to those edits. And so if they alter too much from so let's just say, the recommendation is A, comes back resolvingly C. C wasn't really ever indicated other than coming back from public comment. So if we decide we want to adopt C and it's determined to be a materially enough different from what we did, then we got to go back out again. That's what I understand to be the rule process and somewhat the tediousness of how rulemaking works.
Chair Robinson, Vice Chair Tabor, I do similarly understand that, like other decisions that the commission makes in final fashion, there is a point, and you see us, just as you pointed here, you see us measure it. Is this far enough removed from what the conversation and from that conversation what the expectations have been that requires an additional layer of process? And I do understand that again applies to, for example, the commission's actions on season setting. And I also understand the same sort of filter is applied to the ARPA process.
Sure.
Do you want to add or qualify that anymore, or is that a fair capture of?
Do you have further questions for Greg?
Yeah.
No.
No, you have further questions for, we can interrupt you.
I guess we could pose the first question is that, and just testing that timeline and just how much, just by general statement, my biggest issue with this is wanting to get as much public comment involved. So this came very, very heavy and hard in the last 2 weeks into the folder. That's the first time everybody's seen it. And then we're voting on it directly into rules potentially. And that's the only time frame. And I think we all recall that we've heard an ample supply of feedback from the public saying there never seems to be sufficient enough time to give good and thorough feedback. So I just need to understand what feedback time frame we're being locked into here if we go the administrative rule.
Chair Robinson, Vice Chair Tabor, I'll take a first stab and then I look again for just to clarify. So the options are, the pieces of process to think about in that context are the ability to add hearings. The timeline does include a beginning and an end date, so we need to honor that. Can add hearings within that timeline. And then also there's an option at the conclusion of process where it comes back to the commission where you can decide not to proceed for one reason or another. An interest in more input from the public being one potential reason to take that potential route.
So you're saying if we did decide to go ahead with the arm roll, you can back it off and say we want to start over, or, I mean,
Chair
it's
Robinson.
simple, but
Chair Robinson, yes, and I don't mean to predispose it to that endpoint, but that certainly is an option when it comes back to the commission for final action. The commission could say, not move forward at this time, for want of a better way to say it, Chair Robinson.
So one more follow-up. I'm just, again, trying to pinpoint what rulemaking can and can't do. What if public comment comes back and gives us a kind of a new array of options that weren't considered or certainly not proffered by the committee, but nonetheless represent relatively interesting or new or different ideas? Maybe they will, maybe they won't. My point is if that happens, then do we have to recalibrate in the rule process? You know, I almost feel like rule processes are when you're finally kind of exhausted yourself and now you're ready to go to that direction. And what we have here is phenomenal work done by a committee to kind of narrow it down into a certain set of category. Not everything, as the document admits. They're recommending that it be adaptive and there may be more fine tuning to get to what is a comprehensive plan. But there may be other ideas and everything else that come from a different perspective other than the focus of the committees. And so I don't want to lose out on that opportunity. And so I guess the question I'm asking is, does the rulemaking process lock us into a process that inadvertently or mistakenly, or I don't know how to phrase it, will keep us from getting that valuable input from other factions of public?
Chair Robinson, Vice Chair Tabor, no. So to stay with that specific example, if inputs come into the commission, and the commission likes those inputs and wants to act on them within the described timeline, then that would lead to an assessment. Are these too far out of what the conversation has been, too far out of what public expectation, where we would do well to add another layer of public review? If that were the case, or if you just went to that point and say, okay, these are some really new and intriguing ideas. Let's make, I'm speaking hypothetically here, let's take more time to review these new ideas with the public. It isn't the process of then adjusting the timeline that you've been working on. It's rather concluding that timeline and beginning the timeline anew with another filing, with another initial interaction with the Secretary of State's office to define a new timeline to capture those additional ideas or to expand the scope of the public review. Does that answer your question, Vice Chair?
It does. Sorry, Madam Chair. It does and it doesn't. So I guess the process, it sounds like every time we want to try to modify or whatever, then we have to reset and go through the structure and discipline of the rulemaking process. And that's really the very major point I'm making is, are we quite ready for rules just yet if we haven't got all the consideration or potential options that might be available for a comprehensive solution on the river. That's kind of where and it feels like, with rulemaking, you go down one path and it feels like the final path before you've exhausted every other effort to make sure you got everything you want. And we may be there, I don't know, but
And I think the bigger question is if we have time with the legislature coming up, do we have time to really fully vet this and do it properly?
So Chair Robinson, Vice Chair Tabor, speaking a little bit, I'll speak again to process. So if that is, and I'll call it a prevailing thought that the commission has, then the first procedural reflection of that consideration would be to not initiate rulemaking and rather to instruct the department to do additional outreach on public comment and not sign up for the timeline that the Secretary of State has defined. That would be one immediate way to respond to that sort of circumstance on the commission, in the commission's decision space. That being said, you could also initiate rulemaking just to paint options. You could, speaking figurative here, where you could say, well, let's try this, see how it goes. Always knowing that at the final stage of approval, you could say, okay, and I'll say it this way, just to stay with the example. Okay, you know what? We should have taken a little bit more time to vet these ideas because it really does look like we're not ready to finalize yet. And at that later point in time, decide not to finalize. And then the department, instruct the department to re-engage here, further flesh out these ideas. And let's think about another timeline defined by the Secretary of State's office when we're at the end of that scope.
But we have a deadline. I mean, we have a timeline that we're dealing with. So if we went that route, we at least would have to do an ARM rule change to change the date.
Chair Robinson, the date of implementation, that is my understanding, Chair Robinson.
That covered my question.
Madam Chair, I'm still a little bit confused. If we presume that tomorrow we decide to advance the rulemaking, then that would be initiated on the June 28th cycle at the Secretary of State's office. And then there would be a public comment period of 30, 45, or
Chair, I'm sorry, Chair Robinson, Commissioner, but I don't know what the length of that public comment period would be, but it would be Secretary of State defined. Yes.
The minimum amount.
Yes.
Commissioners, the minimum amount required by the Montana Administrative Procedure Act is 28 days. And according to my calculations, it was approximately 32 days that I calculated it to be after the hearing and the public comment deadline in order to make your August 25th date. And that is because there is a statute in place that was implemented by the last legislature that you cannot adopt. That does not affect any proposal of rules. So I do not want to add another wrench into this discussion. That you cannot adopt any amendments or changes, new administrative rules after October 1st. And so if you wanted to adopt these changes, it would have to be done at that August 25th meeting. So, but if you wanted to, as Quentin was saying before, if you wanted to extend those public comment with any new revisions based on the original public comment and so forth, that could be obtained through an extension of public comment during that October to January 1st period before legislative session. So.
Thank you. Anything for Casey?
Chair Robinson, Director Warsack, I think maybe you're best equipped to answer this one, but it's more about the process. And I just keep replaying in my mind how the hunting regulation process for elk for this coming season went down. And I don't know how, I'm having a hard time seeing how we would do that with this short time frame. I mean, it becomes pretty binary for me. Like, it's more likely that you just go, hey, we're going to push this off to the next season. Rather than, I think we wound up in a pretty good place. At least the public feedback at the commission meeting was positive, and we're going to try some new things. And Anyway, just a comment. If you have any comment, appreciate it, but it just feels very condensed now relative to what, at least what I was thinking on the, when I was sitting on the work group. I thought we were gonna have 60 days of public comment coming out of this and be able to do outreach the way we did on elk breaks, where, you know, I attended 3 community meetings on that one.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Walsh, yeah, I understand that, and I think because the October timeframe to have this thing done, that's what compresses it. So, I guess what you're asking is, are you asking, does it make sense to more, well, extend this to be more of a scope? In this.
Just a general comment about the process. I
Well, and if, excuse me, if it
think it's forcing us to become very binary in how we behave.
if it wasn't a legislative session coming up,
It
we
wouldn't be.
it wouldn't be an issue.
Oh, I see.
It's the October deadline to change it.
Understand.
Commissioner?
Madam Chair, could you explain, you said scoping, what's scoping different than, is that a different process? Can you talk more about department scoping or how that works?
I'll let- go ahead.
Chair Robinson, Commissioner Siegel, and Director. It is my understanding that if you're working with an arm, you have to be working within the Secretary of State. You have to be working with the Secretary of State in that effort. So a general scoping on an arm, without that fitting within the defined process from Secretary of State, that would be out of bounds, for one better way to say it. Perhaps another option to think about is the rule could be initiated and the commission could choose to look at the legislative, the statutory language that says no adoptions after October 1. Use that pause to enhance the public comment opportunities. You could kind of turn that into something that you're looking for as it relates to expanded opportunity, and then conclude after the 1st of January.
Commissioner?
So in other words, I mean, although we have a commission meeting scheduled for August 25th, there's nothing to stop us from having a special commission meeting in September to finalize a rule if we wanted that extra 3 weeks or something for the process.
But September 1st? What's the deadline?
So nothing adopted after Chair
October.
Robinson after October 1.
I'll follow.
Yeah, go ahead.
So in other words, typically when we have a elk or a deer, whatever regulation process, that follows a certain course. For this purpose, we have to follow a different course. So they're not the same process for one. That's correct. Okay. And then follow up on that. In this case, with the Secretary of State, the Armed Rules and the Administrative Procedures Act, we don't have required scoping as such. And I ask that because I believe that we've been scoping this now, this commission for, a couple of years, but prior to that, we've been actually working on this issue for a matter of, it depends on where you draw a line, 12 years to even more. So we've actually been in an iterative process so that we don't need, under the law, we don't need a fresh scoping process for something that's been, building. We've had, was it 3 or 5 petitions for rulemaking within the last 2 years or 3 years. So I feel like a separate scoping process isn't necessarily required by law, is it? Or is it? And the next question would be then, is it really necessary, to meet this commission's goals?
Chair Robinson, I'm sorry.
I guess I even though it isn't required, I think that this committee has put together a more defined look at what we're looking at, I guess. And I would think that I would feel it was our duty to go out for scoping on this, even though I know it's been going on for years. And if it was clear cut, it'd have been done years ago too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So even though it's not required, I really personally feel that it's our responsibility, but. Commissioner Lane, did you?
Madam Chair, I just had a question. What is the September 1st deadline that was mentioned earlier?
It's October.
Chair Robinson, Commissioner Lane, I think it was a misstatement. It's October 1.
Oh, it's October, okay.
Statutory restrictions on concluding a rule after October 1.
Okay, all right, thank
So I'll be finalizing the rule.
Yes,
Yes.
yes, we can, the commission can start the rule, but it can't conclude it in that window between October 1 and January. And that's this year. That's not something that's, yeah, that's during this legislative year.
Nope. No, Tabor?
Quinn, you said something that confused me, because we were talking about the possibility of scoping prior to rulemaking. And you said that was not, you couldn't do that. I think you,
Yep.
I believe that we can. I just want to clarify what you said so that.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Chair Robinson, Vice Chair Tabor. Yeah, to be clear, what I don't know, what I meant to communicate is for a thing that is manifest in a proposed arm rule, I'm not clear just exactly what latitude we have to scope that outside of the Secretary of State's defined time. That's what I'm not clear.
I guess, but if we didn't go ahead with the arm rule, then it's not an arm rule. We're going out for scoping for more public comment
Yeah,
before we made that, if we decided to go that way before the determination was made.
Yeah, Chair Robinson, it may well be, and I'll look to Jess, it may well be that the simple answer is that we're doing that without a commission's direction to initiate rulemaking.
Right. That's what
That
I mean,
that may
that's,
be all of the answer.
I think we have lots of options.
Yeah, lots of options.
That's a lot more than-
Are there any other questions or clarifications that are needed?
I do have
Okay,
another.
Commissioner Tabor.
So there's some excellent, and again, I echo, I should have led with it. We all should lead with this. Thanks to the committee members that are here. Thanks to Casey, phenomenal work. Some of the recommendations are big. They're about as big as anything I think the commission has seen in a while. That doesn't make them bad, doesn't make them good. That just means they're big. And so my initial reaction when I was reading these recommendations was, can we do this? Do we have the legal authority? Is it within our authority as a commission to effectuate some of this stuff? Because number one, I don't know if there's a budgetary threshold where we're only allowed to spend up to X amount of dollars, and then beyond that, you got to go to the governor, the legislature. I don't know. I'm asking. The second piece that's a little confusing to me is, and I can only draw on my experience when I was a licensed practicing outfitter, which I'm not, for the record. NCHU was something that's around. I think most of us are familiar with net client hunting use that's ministered out of the Board of Outfitters. Well, that was created in relationship to the outfitter sponsored license that then ultimately got rescinded. So then at that stage, there was all this NCHU that is actively traded between outfitters and done nothing more but record keeping at the Board of Outfitters. There was a pretty widespread desire to, well, what do we need NCHU for? Because OSL's gone. Well, we couldn't take it away because people have been exchanging cash for NCHU for decades. And so I guess if under the language of the law, it would represent a taking. And so if I understand this process correctly, that's being proposed by the committee, they're creating an opportunity for those permits to be freely exchanged, monetarily exchanged between parties. So once can we do that? And I don't know that you have the answer right now, but it'd be an answer that I think the legal department or somebody has to answer for this commission, because I don't know whether it's within the authority of us to do this. The second piece, and I guess it'll be a question, and I'll ask the committee to be prepared to talk about it tomorrow, is in every other form of permitting, it's actually prohibited to trade. Like if you have a priority use date with the federal government for the Forest Service, or if you have any type of permitted use, DNRC, same thing. These are not transferable. In fact, prohibited by law. It's an act that will get your permit to be revoked. And so, and I don't know, the technical reasons for that, but I do know that the proposal that's being put up right now is calling for something that's different than the way federal permits for sure act and the way the DNRC special recreational use license works. So I feel like there's some legal issues around that too that I don't fully understand and need to be advised. I'm not saying that it's a good thing or bad thing. I'm just saying these are the questions that come to me as a person that seems to have been subject to regulation and know that that's an issue. So it looks like the chair wants to.
You want to respond first? Chair Robinson.
Go ahead.
Yeah,
Commissioner Walsh.
Commissioner Tabor, I think you hit on a topic that the work group wrestled with, and Dan Larson is an attorney, and he spent an extensive amount of time, and we'll be prepared to dialogue about that tomorrow, but would require another layer of permitting, and he's recommended the river use permit that you read about in the book. But I think for that reason, alternative A that's been identified here, the no action, probably does not work. Because then there's no facility for the trade or transfer of either days or, multiple days. And that's a problem for some outfitters that need additional days in the coming season. I've been told that several times. That we need this layer of, river use permit.
When you say coming season, you're talking this summer?
No, 2023.
Okay.
No, I understand the dynamic of that, Madam Chair. But the question is
My suspicion is alternative A would really gum up the works.
presuming that the cap is still there.
Yeah, because the cap's included in the arm.
Right.
Any other questions or clarifications needed? Okay, I guess on the rest of these subjects, thank you very much. On the rest of these subjects, is there any other information that you want to make sure that we have on any of these tomorrow, to be fair to the staff, if there's something? Casey?
To Robinson, I just don't, I read the package on the 454 permits, and I'm curious if we're expecting negative public comment tomorrow, or what we're expecting.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Walsh, I have no idea. I have no idea what's going to go tomorrow.
We'll find out tomorrow.
It's laid out, it's been laid out. It said, all the things have been out there for plenty of time for people to look at. We've got all the things to look at.
I think, well, my question was, is there information that you don't have that you would like for tomorrow? I just want to make sure that you're prepared if there's something that you think, something else that you need. Anything else that the staff would like to add?
Okay, real
Yep,
quick.
go.
So I did hand out basically for everybody to look at where we're at with the flood information. So that's good to look at tonight. We wanted to have questions tomorrow on this, but we are in the process of assessing when we can open Yellowstone back up and under more safe condition, and make sure that we have safe facilities, clean facilities, things like that. So we're looking to put porta potties in where we have to have other ones off and stuff like that. So staff has been doing a great job on that, trying to react to that and think together, and hopefully we'll have something tomorrow for that.
I have one follow-up on
Sure.
that one, and that is if the staff could give some indication tomorrow on what the outlook is for the section between town and 89, the 89 bridge. But my understanding is that Rail Bridge is about to go or is in really bad shape. There was some speculation that FAS is going to be closed for takeouts.
I don't see this on the report.
I just think for the outfitters in the community, they'd appreciate the earlier heads up.
I want to thank all the staff for everything all the work you put into all the preparation for everything for us. Very helpful.
Chair Robinson, like one final, and that's just if the director could give us some, at least for anyone tuning in, what are the next steps on wolf regs? And I've been getting a ton of email on this recently.
So the wolf regs, our recommendation from the department will go out on the 23rd. There'll be public notice at that point. That's what we're putting forward to it. At that point, the commission can look at them, public can look at it, start making public comments. If there are things you disagree with and how the new process is, if there's something that we realize we missed and we want to make an adjustment, we'll contact the commissioner to make that adjustment. If there's things that you want to adjust on it, then you put that request for amendment up.
Just a quick follow-up, just to be clear to anyone tuning in that we're not going to be debating that topic tomorrow in the meeting.
Correct.
I'm sure that's a really good point.
Yeah.
That this is not for discussion tomorrow.
August, right?
August. It will be out on the 23rd. So they can start looking at what the proposals
June
are.
23rd.
Yeah,
June.
June 23rd. Yeah.
Madam Chair, as a follow-up to that, so I've been getting a lot of emails that are asking for one outcome or the other. And I've been trying to let people know, we don't even have a proposal in front of us right now, so it's premature to comment on what we're even gonna vote on, because that won't be, made available to us to everybody until the 23rd. But I would like just a little clarification, if any commissioner feels so inclined to propose an amendment, not only just to that topic, but any of them leading up to the August agenda, when would they have to have that in to the department so that it would be properly reflected in the booklet, if you will, or the public? You know what I'm asking?
Yeah. I'm sure we do have a date written in our process. And I don't have that in front of me. I haven't looked at that, but there is a date we're looking for to give the public plenty of time to have these basically amendments in. So do you have that?
Chair, I don't have a specific date. Chair Robinson, Vice Chair Tabor, functionally, the date is, not later than a date that would allow posting 14 days before the 25th of August. And then on the other side, we would, as staff, we're there to receive amendments from individual commissioners, whenever they are inclined to submit those. And while we have deadlines, and Director Warsek, perhaps I'm going too far here, while we have deadlines, those deadlines are meant to, so for a deadline, in answer to your question, for commissioners to submit amendments or proposed amendments or things they're thinking about. We'll take them up until we simply can't make the 14-day deadline anymore. So it's our date is identified. If you have that date, our date is a date that we made an assessment on, that if we get it, we can make sure we're there 14 days before the commission. But we'll certainly scramble if we get something later.
Otherwise, it has to be at the meeting.
Right. Correct.
We're not
Correct.
precluded from.
That's right. None of this precludes a completely different amendment to show up organically out of the commission's discussion in the moment. That's correct.
Are you showing final approved amendments or do August 4th?
4th of August.
3 weeks before. It's 25th. Yeah.
Yes, 3 weeks before the commission meeting. Yes, I was thinking of the 14 days before, but yes.
Any other questions? All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Same place tomorrow.